Good. Okay, so we start, as I said at the beginning, with the PD part of PDIA, the problem-driven part. And to figure that out, we've got to figure out actually what the problem is. But ultimately, that's fine. So let's just go through it. So the first thing is that we want to try and find local solutions for local problems. Right? At one level, the kind of issues we've just been talking about how to assist births in rural parts of Meghalaya, you would think, well, maybe that's pretty common. But all the devils are in the details, right? What the kinds of legitimacy, the kinds of skills that are actually in place in each of these places is going to be different. Different enough to mean that what works pretty well in one place might not work exactly in another, but with a few tweaks it might work in another. Right? You don't know that. So the essence of all of this is trying to find local solutions for local problems and allowing for local people themselves, especially in something as sacred as birthing, for those people themselves to decide how to nominate and prioritize their own problems rather than relying on an expert to tell them what to do. Right? The next thing is the problem-driven positive deviance, which is to really start beginning to look at what already seems to be working, right? If we've got 6,400 villages across Meghalaya, in a perfect world, we might be able to say, are there like even 10 villages that we can see in the state that have kind of already figured out a good solution to this problem? Before any of us with our nice degrees have showed up, others probably have already figured out what a good day would look like in some of these villages where we've already figured out how to reconcile these two very different imperatives. One for a safe birth in a formal medical institution with the legitimacy and credibility and the familiarity and the comfort that might come from having a traditional birth attendant be part of it. So being able to map out what the array of existing responses already looks like is a key next step in that process, because that gives you a sense of what's already going on. And again, not assuming that your job is to be the great provider of the solution. Your job is to try and share what might already be working pretty well, and then to share and amplify that kind of message. What we then want to try and do is to say, well, it's really great that 10 villages we can identify have done pretty well. We want to learn from all of that. But the solution then isn't to say, well, great, if we found it in these 10 places, now we're just going to scale that up and replicate it, right? We want to go through a similar kind of process of diagnosing other villages and help them to go through a process similar to that, whereby they're able to discern their own instances of where things are going a little bit better than somewhere else. And then sharing potentially some examples of what are people like them, who look like them, who have similar lives to them, similar occupations to them, similar religions to them. What have they come up with? So again, it's their credibility and legitimacy of the solutions you're then suggesting are ones that have come out from their own from experiences of people like them. Right? But even at that point, though, you might yourself be starting to think, oh, there's a number of different ways in which we can address this. And as you get more experience in doing this kind of diagnostic work, you're going to learn a whole bunch of different things you probably didn't know before about what options are on the table here for how different groups solve those particular problems. And you'll come up then with a much richer and deeper menu, as it were, of options for what those might be, but also some potentially new ones that you hadn't thought about before, but the very act of engaging with other people's problems and their solutions gives you then some ideas about how we might set up a space for trying something new, maybe something that hasn't been tried before. And then we'll get to the next steps down the process later about how we get authorization for doing that kind of work, and that's a key part of all of this too. But the I and the A part of PDIA is in that space then of trying to find some examples of what's already working, celebrating those, but not necessarily replicating those, sharing them, and engaging with people in their own worlds to try and help figure out what a local response to their local solution, their local problem might look like. Ultimately, we have conferences like this, where you would have a gathering of people who are working at the similar kind of level, who have a day or two where they can share their kind of experiences with what's going on. And you build out what we call a community of practice. You've got a whole network of people that you would only meet really in occasions like this, where you create a whole networked system whereby these kinds of examples can be shared quickly and cheaply. And that's the wonders of modern technology enable us to do this in ways we would never have done before. But again, you're in that, even in that space where you're sharing in this last space of scaling through diffusion, of starting to get momentum and some initial examples being shared and spread. The idea is not to share the solution, you're sharing a solution. The difference between the definite and the indefinite article makes a big difference. You're sharing solutions plural. You're showing examples of how different groups have solved things and making that be the way in which you engage with the issue. Not that you go up to the top, get it approved by a big senior person at the top. You're working laterally to try and share the examples of what's working. Right? So that's largely the step-by-step process that's outlined in detail in your PDIA toolkit that's on your table there. Okay. So the first step, and this is probably the most boring part, the hardest part in the sense that it's messy and it can take a long time, and because it's new for a lot of people, it's often where people start to potentially lose some initial enthusiasm. So your work in the PDIA space has to be very good and intense right from the get-go. But what are we doing? We're trying to construct the problem, and then following up that, deconstruct the problem. Because as we'll see soon, and as we will do as a group shortly as well, there is different levels and layers of problems. Right? High maternal mortality is a problem, but that doesn't map easily onto a solution. There's a whole cascading series of ways in which that becomes, as Sampath was saying, that's the example of the outcome of a whole series of different problems that all manifest tragically in the death of a mother and potentially a death of a child as well. So here we start off by looking at how we construct problems that matter. Am I doing this, or you're going to do it? Yep, great.
So as Professor Michael was saying, this can be a part where we lose a bit of steam because it's a bit of work, but we will take you through it relatively quickly and just highlight a few of the principles for going about it. First, in terms of construction, so what we mean by this is, how do you even define what is your problem? How are you going to say that this thing is your problem? And so there are a few principles in PDIA that are used. One is defining a problem according to how it is seen locally. What is the problem that matters to the people who are affected by that problem? So that's one guideline. Secondly, does it matter to other people who can affect the change in this? It should matter to people, it should be able to motivate change. Third, can it be broken down into smaller pieces? And finally, can it be sequenced? Can you break it into pieces that can be done in time? You do one, then another, then another. And one tool you can use when you have a problem in mind is to ask, why does it matter? So we'll just take one example here. So let's say that one problem we've taken is that student enrollment and attendance is low. So what you can do is ask, why does that matter? Well, it matters because if students are not in class, they do not study. Why does that matter? Because children will not learn how to read or write. And there, that last one, there's your problem. It's a problem that matters to many people. It's a problem that matters to people locally. This is what the parents are going to care about. It's a problem that matters to society. And it's one that we can break down. So when we say construction of the problem, that's what we mean. We mean keep asking why. Why does that matter? Until you get at the core of why it matters, and that is your problem. So now we come to deconstructing. So we've found our problem that we want to focus on. Children not learning how to read or write. To make any headway on this, we need to break it into smaller pieces. That is one of the techniques of PDIA, is to try to see where can we actually make progress on this. And in order to do that, we try to break it down. So we start asking ourselves, again, why? Why does this happen? Children can't read or write. Why does it happen? They don't spend enough time on learning and practicing the basic reading skills. This is one example answer. There are many more answers, but this is one example. So why does that happen? Children don't study or spend time on homework after school. Why does that happen? Neither parents nor teachers have time or inclination to work with children after school hours. So here we've just done a few of these steps of breaking down our first answer as to why this problem happens. If you do that again and again with different potential answers to your problem, you start to get a number of different directions, a number of different causes that are contributing to this problem. And one technique is to put them all together in a sort of a map. And we call this a fishbone diagram because it looks like the bones of a fish. So that's an easy way to remember it. And so you can see that in the yellow are major causes. So we said previously, children don't do homework or study after school. So that was one of our main causes. And we've put that down there. You can identify other main causes of why children are not reading or writing. And for each of these, you can break them down into sub-causes. So when you do this, at first it can look rather disheartening. You started off with one problem, now you have 20, 30, 50 problems. But I want to encourage you that you should not feel discouraged when you see this, because each of these is an opportunity, is another way to try to start solving the problem. So why do we do problem construction and deconstruction? One of the reasons we do this, and something that I think, for those of you who've been in PDIA workshops in the past, and I know some of you have done this, there's something that I think we should emphasize more and talk about more, which is that you, by yourself, can do this exercise. You can construct the problem, you can deconstruct the problem, fine, and that is useful. But one of the reasons we do this exercise is to build consensus, especially political consensus, social consensus, about what is the problem we are trying to solve. Because if we have different views of what that problem is, that can then lead to struggles later on if we need to mobilize people to act. So one thing we want to just encourage you, a footnote, a very important footnote on this problem construction and deconstruction, is that this works best if you do it in groups with the people who are stakeholders to the problem. Another key point as to why we do this, as I've mentioned, is that it provides you more opportunities to try to solve the problem. And finally, another very important reason, something that we've seen in the PDIA workshops that we've been doing in Meghalaya, with some of you and with others as well who are not in this room, is that as we do this exercise, as we try to answer why does a problem happen, we often end up sticking to our default notions. This problem is happening because of X. And X is just the first thing that comes to mind. And we stay stuck there. So one thing that we want to really encourage you all to do is to think beyond that default. Your fishbone has many branches. So maybe you'll start off with 1 or 2 or 3 different potential causes for your problem. But if you keep going and flesh that out, you'll start to uncover others that you hadn't thought about. So just to give an example on this point about default notions, I'll invite again our Principal Secretary to give us a case of what happens if we can think more deeply about the problem and break it down.
I think the better people are there in the room to explain. A lot of the BDOs who have worked as a BDOs, who worked as project directors. But just I want to tell you, this one, the state doesn't have Panchayat Raj institutions, you know this. So in the absence of Panchayat Raj institutions, the state government has innovated a very interesting idea of village employment councils. So they have come in 2005, 2006, these village employment councils have come, started from West Garo Hills and South Garo Hills later in 2008, Kongirap, when it started with all this whole state, 2010. Yeah? 2008-9, it was scaled up to the entire state. So what we observed was actually, you know, in fact, I don't want it to go this. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. Yeah, if you look at, I think better the diagrams, you know, when we started seeing when 2013, 14, 2014, 15, have you seen the number of inactive VECs? So we formed the village employment councils, but they were not, you know, built the capacity or the purpose why they have been formed. So they were inactive. It's like 4,550 out of 6,400. So if you look at the percentage, if you see, they are like this. It's because you must have seen the kind of a graph like a plateau for quite a number of years. So what we did was, we just did only one thing, just to go to the village to village or block to block, just tell about the purpose. Why, what is the purpose of actually, why we have formed, why actually the existence of village employment councils. When we started talking to especially the village employment council members, and then it's a kind of a lot of iterative approach where I think there are so many challenges. They started saying that, first of all, there is a delay in wages. We don't get wages, on time. Why should we work? Why should we take up the works? And there is a lot of challenges in terms of, there is people do not know the purpose of it. So what we did was, in this process, while going that block to block, we build that capacity of the people in a way that they could able to see the purpose of it, how actually we can use this definitive resources. We started saying that, okay, even if there is a delay in wages, you get the wages. There is an assurance. Because this is actually done by the government, and it is not something that, you can get away with it. We will fight for the wages. We will take up with the Government of India. And, we started actually engaging with the national leadership. We invited the Joint Secretary M. Janarija here, and we made her to actually see the potential of the village employment councils, which were doing very well. And she got motivated to, how actually this can be done. And, at one go, all these, pending wages for like 2-3 years were cleared. And, it was like that situation. And then the iterative approach. Then what we did was, with this new thinking, like we also we felt there is a problem, because though we formed the village employment councils, we don't have a support systems to really nurture those village employment councils. We came out with an idea of community, institution, CLIBP, community leadership and institution building, a subset of a program within the MGNREGA, put some kind of a support system. We brought, facilitators called as, additional program officers, a new cadre, whose job is essentially to look at, the building the leadership. What are the challenges in your village? Why actually you're not able? So we invested in building the leadership. Once we invested in building the leadership, you can see the graph. It's an exponential. In fact, there is another graph. If you see, in 2015-16, it was about 250 crores. Now it is 1,600 crores project. So it is like every year we are getting 1,000 crores additional money just by investing in. That money is going into the people. So that's again an approach. What I would like to say is that a lot of adaptive approach is required. There are so many things actually in that. One, building leadership, and again the block development officers. They have so many suggestions, and they were given a lot of autonomy.
And now I'll hand it over again to Professor Michael to take us through sequencing and prioritizing.
Alrighty. So what's the next? The first thing we need to do, having gone through this constructing and deconstructing process, if that's been done thoroughly and done comprehensively, and with all the right people that need to be around the table contributing to it, hopefully then you'll have some initial ideas about what might happen, and you'll then be needing to think about, well, what are the steps that are going to need to be undertaken in order for that to actually be achieved? You don't just declare it. You have to try and make these kinds of things happen. And critically, especially because we work in the public sector, we're not free-floating entrepreneurs. We can't be rogue agents who just decide to take matters into our own hands and do whatever the heck we want to do. The essence and the beauty and the constraint of working in the public sector or any place like a multilateral organization is that whatever you do largely has to be authorized by somebody. And so that's a really crucial part of it. Authority can come in various different forms. We all sit in some organizational chart, for example. We have a manager, a boss of some kind. That's one kind of form of authority you might need to get in the short run, or as an initial first step. But if you are undertaking quite an ambitious set of reforms, it might the scale of what you're suggesting, or the nature or the sensitivity, political sensitivity around what you're searching for, might require a higher or different form of authorization in order for you to do that work. There might be a difference between the political and the legal forms of authority that you might need. You might need some advice in saying, well, this is a really politically sensitive issue right now, where maybe we need to do this a different way. It might actually not be consistent with prevailing administrative law to actually do the kinds of things that you're suggesting. Or it might need a higher order of legal person to be able to override that and give you the necessary authorization to do that. It's probably going to require some financial authorization. What you're doing is probably going to cost money. That's going to be generated out of some source, and some person's got to say, yes, I'm going to authorize you to spend that money when I could authorize it to be spent on something else, right? So there's a lot of navigating and a lot of good homework you're going to need to do in order to be able to figure out what kinds of formal sources of authority you're going to need to be able to do that kind of work. So again, it's not that can be relatively straightforward in some circumstances if the kind of problem that you've identified and the kind of solutions at this stage that you are considering and the space that you're trying to create for doing this different kind of work is relatively clear, then you just go ahead and seek that form of authorization. But we'll come back to some of those aspects as we go forward. This broader space in which we're now beginning to go from the type and priority of problem to the kinds of solutions we're now going to be enacting it's what we call a change space. And that change space needs not just the authorization, that's the first step. You're not going anywhere, and someone's actually in writing and or, well, not or, always in writing, but other forms of authority might need to be conveyed in some way nonetheless. There needs to be the ability to actually do this kind of work, right? Because if you've got a great authorization, but you don't really have confidence that your team can actually do this kind of work, then it's probably not going to go anywhere either. So here, we're looking really at the kinds of skills, the resourcing, and the coherence in your teamwork to be able to do that kind of work. Again, that's going to be perhaps initially a subjective kind of measure, because it won't be clear until you actually start doing this work often whether your team can actually do it. But there has to be some reasoned explanation given for why you think your team of people are up for this, right? And part of your job then as a leader, especially in an adaptive leadership space, is being able to apprehend and then decide whether your team of people can actually does have the ability to do this work. We call this the AAA change space for this authority issue, for this ability issue. And the last one just is the acceptance of this, right? That's perhaps a more fuzzy kind of idea, but taking on something that's new, taking on something that's innovative, sounds nice in a room at a nice hotel. Being innovative and trying to do something new means it might not work. None of us in the public sector want to do things that don't work. We don't want to have our annual review filled with a long list of things that we tried that didn't work. Your boss sure as heck doesn't want something big as a headline in a local newspaper about the profligacy or the incompetence of local government officials, which means you or me or whoever's ever doing this kind of work. So there has to be some broader acceptance that what we're trying out here is in fact supported by the people who are going to be involved in it, because it might not have a happy ending. Remember the epic adventure. The epic adventure can be triumphant. You can arrive as heroes as a result of having pulled off the kinds of big transformational change that you're seeking in. An epic adventure can also end in a shipwreck. Right? It can also end disastrously. That's what being entrepreneurial means, is that you might not succeed in what you're trying to do. Right? Now, usually the stereotype is that public service types are usually risk-averse people. We choose the safety of a job because the salary is predictable, hopefully. We have some job security. We can't be fired indiscriminately, all those nice things. So the idea is, in some sense, that public servants, public administrative people, have low tolerance for these kinds of things, so they're not risk-taking kinds of people, right? Being the new leadership generation that we're trying to promote here means that we want to break that stereotype and seeing but not break it because you're a rogue agent or because you're a cowboy who just runs off and does whatever the heck they want. You're trying new things because that's what it actually takes to solve the problem you face. Being a good public servant means, we're trying to argue, that you will need to try different things because it's just, unless you're a genius, unless you're a god, you don't know up front what the right answer is. You have to find it, or you and your team have to find it, and you might get lost trying to find it. Someone might get hurt trying to find it. That's what the epic aspect of this is. And that's what you have to be okay with. Because if everyone freaks out about that, then you shouldn't be maybe starting there. Right? So this AAA change space then, when you do that as a Venn diagram, is saying is your initial step, having done this construction and deconstruction step, is to do an analysis of your change space. How much authorization am I likely to be able to get? How robust is that going to be potentially under pressure when things don't quite go as planned? When I'm 15 years into my bridge building program and haven't got much to show for it, is the leader who authorized it still going to be championing you and supporting you or not? Right? How big is that space? How big is the ability space? How much talent and persistence and grit do you have amongst your own team members to persist with trying out these new things that might require them to feel a little uncertain about what they're doing? Are they okay with the discomfort that might elicit in them sometimes? Right? You got to make a judgment about that. And then how much just broad acceptance does this have? Not only amongst your own team, but potentially the people you're going to be changing with. When you're dealing with pregnant women, are they okay with you trying out new ways of doing things? Maybe they feel like you're suddenly treating them like guinea pigs, like little rats in some experiment. They won't want to be treated like that. That's not how you would want to be treated, right? So there has to be a lot of work done to try and say, are you okay with us trying out some new approaches here? Because we're trying ultimately to solve the problem, but we don't know exactly how to do it. And that's going to require a lot of deep diplomatic work to try and apprehend just how much acceptance you actually do have for trying out these new things. And that's hard. Right? We said at the beginning, this is hard, it's not easy. And apprehending what that change space looks like is the basis on which you make a wager. Waging, not so much in a gambling sort of sense, but you make a calculated decision. It's not a guaranteed decision, it's a calculated decision. It's a wager that if we do this, it will be okay. We'll be doing what we're doing because it's been authorized. We'll be doing what we do it because both our team members and the people we're working with accept it. And we're doing this because we believe we have the ability to be able to actually do this, which history might then turn out to say, actually, we don't have that. That's the risk you're taking. The upside is you have found a whole new way to address a problem that has, in this case, especially in the case of maternal mortality, vexed the world forever. Women should not have to die in childbirth, right? We can solve and should commit ourselves to solving that problem. But here we are in the 21st century, we still haven't solved that problem. We, the world, hasn't solved that problem, and each individual village that's trying to solve that problem hasn't solved it either. So this change space is a big section of your toolkit. You'll see, and when you are going through this as a team, you'll be engaging in those very difficult kinds of questions about who exactly do we need to see to get the authorization for all this. I think that's probably the next slide, is it? No, ideation. Okay, keep going. So you're going to talk about this, no? Yeah, good.